Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructed Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at PureMTGO.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructedCriticism.com. Hello everybody and welcome to this week's episode of Mythic Cast. I am your host Spencer, and I'm joined by nobody this week. It is one of those rare solo episodes. One of the reasons it is solo is because we had a scheduling conflict, and so I didn't record last week, so I'm actually doing a double episode this week. So enjoy your double dose of Mythic Cast. So we'll be recording another episode later this week with the guests that we're going to have on last week. We're going to talk about Rakdos Aggro. But today, we're bringing the Quest for 10 series over to Mythic Cast. For those who don't know, the Quest for 10 series is a series where I pick a deck, and I try and get 10 wins with it on MTGO or Arena, or kind of wherever, and then I talk about the deck and what I learned in trying to get those 10 wins. Today, we're going to be talking about a deck that I went 15-5 with. I enjoyed the deck so much that I kept playing it, and that is Bant Midrange, or Bant Ramp, or Bant Control, depending on who you are and what you want to call it. Before we get too far into Bant Ramp, though, I do want to just once again remind everybody to check out our sponsor at PureMTGO.com. It means the world to have such an amazing sponsor. You should check out everything that people are doing over there and the content that people are coming out with every single day for them and MTGO Traders, their sponsor. We're going to move on over, if you're watching on YouTube, and talk about this deck. So Bant Ramp is a deck that I was really excited about. I had a friend of mine, his name is Mason Clark. He's an SCG grinder on Team Nova, if you haven't heard of him. He's actually the host of my old podcast, Constructed Criticism. Highly recommend you check it out. Check out the things that they're doing over there with himself and Matt. And he qualified for the Pro Tour with this deck, and I think it was 2 days before he did so. Or the Players Tour, sorry. Old school Magic player mentality. I can't even call it the right name. But before he did that, he and I were talking about the deck, and he said, what was that deck that you guys played with all the Mythics that was Bant back in the day? And I was like, Bant Mythic? It was Bant Mythic Conscription. And while this deck doesn't play quite as many Mythics, it does play a lot of really good cards. And it doesn't play a lot of Mythics because Planeswalkers like, as we can see here, Teferi, Time Reveler, Tamiyo, and Nissa are actually not Mythics. They're actually rares. So otherwise, it would basically still be Bant Mythic. And also Elspeth conquers that's rare. But still a lot of really powerful cards and a lot of the same idea. You're kind of playing a ramp deck. That deck played Birds of Paradise and Lotus Cobra. This deck plays Aboreal Grazer and Growth Spiral and Euro Titan of Nature's Wrath. And then it plays a bunch of really powerful either engine cards or just answers. It's really funny because thinking back on it, a similar scenario played out where one of the best decks in Standard was this tap-out Jace the Mind Sculptor blue-white control deck with Baneslayer Angel and Day of Judgment. And then they were like, well, screw that. We're just going to be better on mana and get to play all the same cards against aggro and all this stuff. It was really funny to kind of see those comparisons play out. And you kind of see that here. You're trying to get a mana advantage and play a mid-range game. And this type of deck exists typically because of polar opposites in a format existing. Something like mono red with Ember Cleave and blue white control, right? These decks are so far apart. And the other thing is that the Fires decks, I think, have a pretty bad matchup against blue white control. And because of that, they don't get to be that middling deck, that deck in the middle, to kind of prey on both of those decks. Before we get into kind of matchup specific stuff, I just want to talk about the deck list that I ended up with at the end of this run. We have 2 Aboreal Grazer, 4 Growth Spiral, 3 Euro Titan of Nature's Wrath, 2 Banishing Light, 4 Teferi, 1 Tamiyo, 3 Shadow of the Sky, 3 Elspeth Conquers Death, 4 Nissa Who Shakes the World, 1 Time Wipe, 1 Dream Trawler, 4 Hydroid Krasis, and 28 lands. The important lands here being only 1 Fabled Passage and 1 Castle of Vantress, which might surprise people. So, a couple things. This deck has a lot of mana, and the Castle of Vantress, you might say, well, that's just a waste of your mana. It's won me a couple games. It's something new that I've been trying out. I don't know that it's correct, but it's certainly better than a lot of the other things that I've tried in the slot. And I tried another Fabled Passage. I actually tried an extra Plains at one point because I was having trouble getting double white for things like Shadow of the Sky, Elspeth Conquers Death, Time Wipe, and Dream Trawler. But overall, I actually found that I needed more ways to use my mana. I mean, to the point where we even have less Aboreal Grazers and less lands than we used to have, because the deck was just so land heavy. At one point I was playing 29 lands, which I think a lot of lists are still playing. So I mean, the deck uses its mana a lot. A lot. I mean, between the number of cards that you're drawing with Teferi, you're getting stuff back with Elspeth Conquers Death. You're drawing cards with Krasis and Dream Trawler and Growth Spiral and Euro. I mean, you're just drawing so many cards and going through your deck. I, in fact, decked myself on stream one day. It was like some of the worst Magic I've ever played, and I just decked myself just on accident. I was like, shoot, well, I'm dead. So the deck just churns through stuff, and Castle of Interest just makes it so that you're able to, when you're getting that flood, you're able to get out of it really quickly. And I like that about the card, and it's kind of one of the thing that I also like about this deck, and something that's pretty different, is how versatile the answers can be. I've picked Banishing Light. I know a lot of people don't play anything like this. In fact, a lot of lists you might see might be playing 2 Narsets or another Tamiyo in this slot. Personally, I tried Narset. I missed with it a lot. When you have 28, 29 lands, and also you're playing ramp creatures like a Aboreal Grazer. Maybe you can't play a Aboreal Grazer and play that, but it was actually really hard to hit with Narset consistently. And while it's really good in the mirror, to be honest, to have that Narset, and you would have to cut Grazer, which I think is just kind of a vital part of this deck. So this is the list that I've ended up with. Let's kind of talk about the format and kind of the journey on this quest for 10. So if we pull up MTG Goldfish today, the top decks are number 1 with 37 decks, 18.88 mono red. Next is Temur Adventures with 27 decks, 13.7%, almost 13.8. Then it's this deck with 11.2. Then it's Azorius with 7.65. Then it's Rakdos, Fires, Junfood, and Sultai, being up the 8 decks that have at least 5% of the meta, with Temur Reclamation and Gruul Aggro that were 2 popular decks for a little while in the format, dropping to 3 and 2.5%. So we've seen about 10 decks in this metagame, and that's a pretty open metagame. It also is something why you might want to have wide answers, like what we have here, right? Banishing Light, Shadow of the Sky, Time Wipe, Teferi, Elspeth Conquers Death. These are answers that catch a lot of different things and attack a lot of different areas of the metagame, and that's a reason to play a deck like this. The other thing that you can do in a format like this is try and gain advantages in different ways. Ramp spells give you mana advantage and make you be able to do things a little bit faster to put pressure on your opponent without having to play something like an aggro deck. I really love ramp decks that act as control decks because they get to play mid-range or they get to play control depending on the matchup. And they also get to kind of pressure people in different ways while also really putting your opponent on a clock to beat you before you slam something like a Dreamcrawler or a giant Hydroid Krasis. It's still putting pressure on your opponent just in a different way, and I really enjoy that about this style of deck. Overall, I played against basically everything that we just saw. I can't think of one of these that I didn't. I definitely played the mirror. I don't know that I played against Junfood or Rakdos. I might have played against Rakdos and lost to it, or Junfood and lost to it. I remember playing against an Oven deck and losing, but I don't know which of these it was. Sultai Midrange is one that I played against a couple of times that did not impress me. And then Temur Adventures is probably the deck that I played against the most, leading me to believe, actually, that I think this deck might actually have a decent matchup against Adventures. I did lose to it the first time that I played against it, but kind of talked to some people about how they were sideboarding, what they were doing with their Aether Gusts, with their Dobin Vetoes, things like that, and kind of how they're sort of sideboarding. And then also bringing Banishing Light into the equation really kind of helped that matchup out for me. It only took me a couple of days to get to 10 wins. I also don't play as much Magic as I used to, as I play a lot of Super Smash Bros. Right now. So I would say it took me, 2 streams and, some time in bed. So really not that long to get to the 15 wins, and it, really a deck that I really enjoyed. Also, this deck takes forever to play. If there's one complaint about this Bant deck, holy crap, does it take forever. I mean, you sit down and play a mirror match, you better buckle up, Buttercup, because you're in for a long ride. So the key cards in the main deck, I think, are number 1, Elspeth Conquers Death. This card blows me out of the water. I'm so impressed with it. The exiling any permanent, I've used this on Cleave. I've used this on Teferi. I've used this on Nissa. I've used this on opposing Dream Trawlers. I've used this on Uro. You use this on a lot of different things. I've used this on Questing Beast, and then the thing to think about is that it's another thing when you think about like having Uro in your graveyard all the time just means that Elspeth Conquers Death final ability might just be gain life, draw through cards. But honestly, that's still okay. You got to gain through life, draw a card, slow your opponent down depending on the deck they're playing, all for 5 mana. I mean, this card is a deal, and in some cases, you're getting back a Teferi or a Nissa. The number of times that I've gotten back a Nissa and my opponent forgot about, and I just killed him out of the yard with it, it's pretty high. One thing that is pretty sad is its interaction with Hydroid Krasis isn't great, but it's still one of the most important cards in the deck, is that catch-all that also sometimes will act as a win condition. The second most important card in the deck is probably still Nissa. You are still a ramp deck when you without your ramp spells plus Nissa. You want to get a mana advantage over your opponent and close the game out by casting a Hydroid Krasis and then just burying your opponent. It's very often how this deck wins. One of the things that it's in here is Dreamcrawler. For me, I don't know that I would play Dreamcrawler in paper because I can play so much faster in paper, but you kind of want to close out games on Arena, and Dreamcrawler was just a great way to get to do that. But overall, I mean, the most of your games are going to come down by burying your opponent in Hydroid Krasis and Euro triggers. I mean, that's really what it's going to be. And Euro, whatever he's called. Euro is another card that is just kind of the piece that everybody either thought was going to be way too good or just is super overrated, and it just turns out the card's really powerful and a great tool for decks like this. The mana, I think you could argue you might want 29 lands. I found myself getting flooded a lot with 29 lands. And overall, I think between the number of scries and the filtering through your deck, you're going to hit your land drops. It's true that if you miss your land drops in a deck like this, it's a death sentence, but you get flooded so much on 29 lands that I really wanted to go to 28. I know that people will probably go in the comments and tell me the math is 29 when you play the number of explorers that you're playing. I had a friend of mine actually tell me, he's like, you're not playing enough lands. And I'm like, listen, man, I've played, and now I've played 20 matches with the deck. I can't do 29. But I wouldn't fault you for doing so. I do believe that with this many explorers, it could definitely be correct. I think one of the cooler interactions in this deck, too, is when you get to bounce your own stuff with Teferi, bouncing your own Banishing Light with a creature under it, and then Shattering Sky. Teferi is always surprising, kind of how much it does. You play a Teferi against the blue eye control deck, and they're like, oh crap, now like how am I gonna win? And at the same time, it bounces something back to your opponent's hand that you really don't want to deal with, or it's just this amazing tempo play that bridges you. Who knew Teferi was gonna be so busted, man? I mean, this card is sweet. Let's move on to the sideboard really quick. We have 2 Devout Decree, 3 Aether Gust, 3 Dobin's Veto, 2 Mystical Dispute, and 3 Lovestruck Beast, as well as 2 Questing Beasts. Questing Beast has really surprised me. I'm boarding it up in kind of more matchups than I expected, and whether you're on the play or the draw matters, the context of your opponent's deck matters, and it's kind of just this big beater that has come in a few more spots than I thought it went. I know that I boarded it in against, for example, Temur Reclamation, just as a beater, and also boarded it in against some of the aggro decks. It really, if it can pressure a planeswalker productively, you probably bring it in, or if you need to put the aggression on your opponent, it can come in. It surprised me. It was one that when I saw it in Mason's sideboard, I was not sure about it, but I've been impressed with it. The other card that I've probably been the most impressed with is Dobin's Veto. This card's really good in the format right now, and I know that some lists have played as many as 4 of these, with some of these in the main deck. It's definitely a card that you're going to bring in a lot of different spots. Devout Decree is another one that I've seen people play up to 4 of. I don't think that that's where the format is right now. However, I have not been playing against a ton of Rakdos, and I think your mono red matchup is just as good with 2, 3 Aether Gusts, some Lovestruck Beast and Questing Beast, with everything else you've got going on, that I haven't felt that need, but it could be that you do need those. But Lovestruck Beast, house against that deck, and Aether Gust is as well. So overall, I think that when you look at against control decks, right, the thing that you're looking at doing is probably on the play maybe being more aggressive, but you have Dobin's Veto and Mystical Dispute against them. And you have cards to board out between Aboreal Grazer, Shadow of the Sky, Time Wipe. I don't actually always board out all my Wraths against them because they have Dreamcrawler and they have the Enchantment Pegasus against you. So sometimes you might want something like a Time Wipe to be left in your main deck against that deck, especially against Dreamcrawler. So I haven't always been boarding out all of my Wraths there, but that's kind of, I think, a play it by ear type of thing. Against what I believe is the best deck right now, which is Temur. You have your 3 Aether Gust, and I've actually been boarding in Dobin's Veto as well. If you get them to counter their the spell half of their thing, then they don't get to cast the creature half, so they don't get to kind of bury you in that advantage. I didn't expect that to be good, but it was actually a friend of mine who suggested that, and it's actually worked out pretty well. And I think I flipped that matchup. I think I lost to it the first time I played, and I don't know that I've lost to it since. So, and I started boarding in Veto in those cases. So super helpful overall. This deck is pretty good. If there were cards to consider moving forward, it would either be replace Time Wipe with something, replace Dream Trawler with something, or go back to a way to fit in either another Tamiyo and maybe some Narsets. You could probably just as easily cut these for a Narset and a Tamiyo. The problem that I had with Narset is like I said, I don't know that you can play Narset with a Aboreal Grazer, and I personally really like Grazer. I think that you need it against some of the aggro decks. While it's not as good against Gruul or something like that, it is pretty good against Mono Red. Other than that, I think the biggest thing that you need to worry about is kind of managing your library is something to worry about. As I said before, I did deck myself once, and I've gotten pretty close. I posted a picture on Twitter of me winning in the mirror with one card left in my library. It definitely can happen. It's something you need to be super cautious of. And then also the other thing to think about is kind of how you play your Nissas. You can turn the corner pretty fast and get, double or triple Nissa in one turn to kill your opponent, and it's certainly not something that I think people see coming. That is going to do it for this deck. I would play this deck moving forward. If I had a standard tournament tomorrow, this is the deck that I would play. Leave a comment, let me know what you think. If you want sideboard guides for these videos, leave a comment. If we get enough likes, let's do 15 likes on this week's video. I will post a sideboard guide for this deck. So thank you everybody so much for watching, so much for listening. If you're over on the podcast feed, don't forget to go to Patreon. Don't forget to go to the YouTube channel for constructive criticism and go to twitch.tv/HeezyGameMedia to see me streaming my Quest for 10 stuff. And we'll see you guys all for another episode this week with a guest. Stay tuned. Thank you everybody so much, and we'll see you later.